Greetings everyone, Slizzle466 here, and in today's video, we're looking at my Wild Meta View number 1. This is going to be a new series that will be returning every month or so, and we'll be looking at the best Tier 1 to Tier 3 decks in Wild. If there's a deck that you don't see in here, that's because it falls into Tier 4, because Wild has so many decks available. It's just too much to go through all those Tier 4 decks. So we start with Tier 1. There's only one deck that I have in there. It is Discard Warlock. There are different builds of it floating around, but I've been really enjoying this specific build because of the inclusions of the Shallow Grave. So the Shallow Grave can trigger off your Expired Merchant to give you a bunch of extra value, which is really great. But what I like even more is the Grave Defilers. So they copy a Fel spell in your hand. The only Fel spell in this deck is Fist of Jaraxxus. If you've managed to reduce the cost to 1 of the Tome Tampering, that gets copied. If the Fist of Jaraxxus is about to get discarded, it'll copy that. And it just gives you a lot of extra damage out of nowhere. But definitely the best deck in the Wild meta, way above anything else that's currently playable. Moving on to Tier 2, we have Shudderwock Shaman. This list is not running any new cards. It's just the Shudderwock Shaman that we saw before the Lich King expansion. So it's running a lot of Murlocs. It draws them out with cards like Clownfish and Ice Fishing. Sorry, the Clownfish reduces the cost, but the Warlock Ravager also draws more Murlocs. Because Murlocs in this list help you clear the board with your Firemancer Flurgle Toxfin. And you've also got your Mutinous, which is incredible. But basically, it just clears the board, freezes a lot, pulls things out of your opponent's hand, makes them not be able to play spells, makes them not be able to play minions, and then you just lock them out in the game with the Shudderwock. Secret Mage is still going strong. This list is also not running any new cards. This specific list, I think, is pretty solid. I don't like running Ice Block in my Secret Mage. You're running an aggro deck, so you should just be winning. You don't need Ice Block to buy you an extra turn. So the secrets that we have in this list are one Counterspell, 1 Explosive Runes, 1 Netherwind's Portal, 1 Oasis Alley, 2 Rigged Fair Games. I like having all these one-offs because it makes it more difficult for your opponent to guess. As for Rigged Fair Game, it's an insane card. Keep it in the mulligan at all times. Get it out as early as possible, start drawing through your deck, and then in the mid to late game, if you're still not quite there, you've got the Sage, Seer of Darkmoon to draw out most of the remaining of your deck, and you win. Next we have Even Shaman, no new cards. So again, this is the Even Shaman that we saw before the Lich King expansion launched. This specific list I'm a big fan of because of the Double Cult Neophyte. There's a lot of decks running spells, so that helps delay. I like the inclusion of the Frostbite. Again, it removes some board on your opponent's side, or you could do it on your own side if you're desperate. But again, just delaying your opponent playing spells. But outside of that delaying, you're basically just making ridiculously crazy, awkward boards to deal with. You've got Carving Chisel, Totemic Might, Totemic Surge, copy all the stuff with the Axe, buff them even more with Stonewright. It's a really strong deck, and a good one to climb with. The last Tier 2 deck we have is Pirate Rogue. No new cards. Look at that. It's just the Pirate Rogue we've seen forever. It runs Mr. Smite, which is okay. Some people like it, some people don't. You might want to swap it out for a lower Theb. It's up to you. But otherwise, Pirate Rogue is just pretty solid, straightforward to play, and gives you quick wins. Now we move to Tier 3. So at the top of Tier 3, I have placed Reno Priest, and specifically the Reno Renathal Shadow Priest. which I wasn't a huge fan of initially, but I've learnt to grow accustomed to it. It's actually pretty good. So you've got 40 cards, you've got the more aggressive hero power, and this is basically playing out like a control value deck. So you're not going for the whole spawn of shadows, ping your opponent down. You're just slowly making your way through the game. Usually your opponent just gives up. But if they don't give up for some reason, you've got so many little spells. You can steal stuff from your opponent's deck with things like Thought Steal. This list is running Sister Spawner, which you don't necessarily need to have in the list. So if you don't own this card, don't worry about it. Just put something else in. Maybe a Skulking Geist if 1 mana spells are causing you problems. But otherwise, you know, once you've got your Raza and your Anduin going, you can just slowly whittle down your opponent over several turns and win the game. Next we have Quest Mage. Now I chose kind of a quirky version because I saw this come up and this specific player did climb to #1 legend with this list. It's kind of quirky because it's a 40 card list, so it is running the Prince Renathal. But if you look at the basic build of it, it's still just your everyday Quest Mage. It's got pretty much everything that the 30 card Quest Mage has with some additions. So, you know, you've got Devolving Missiles, you've got Solid Alibi, buys you a bit of time. Though some 30 card Quest Mage do run this as well. You got Bran and Cold Light, which is a cute combo for milling or drawing for yourself. Vast Wisdom lets you get 2 spells that cost 3 or less, and you swap their costs, which is kind of nice just to get the quest going. But when it comes down to it, it's the infinite turn build of Quest Mage, so you're trying to play the Time Warp, play the Parrot multiple times, combo the Parrot with the Bran. Don't always want to combo Bran with the Cold Light. Comboing Bran with the Parrot's way better. The 30 card Quest Mages do typically run Magister Dawn Grasp, and a lot of the reason is you just get a free ice block a lot of the time, which is nice. And this list is running Grand Magister Romath, just to recast everything you've played that wasn't in your deck to start with, just to get some extra nice value. Then we have Big Priest. No new cards here, nothing fancy, it's just your everyday Big Priest. You run 3 minions, 2 Blood Cahoon, 1 Neptulon. You cheat them out as early as possible with Illuminate. If that doesn't work, you can always get more of them with Gift of Luminance. It's not the greatest deck actually, because the meta's so fast it gets beat down pretty hard, which is why it's in tier 3, but when it does get that high roll, it's unstoppable. This list is also running Desperate Prayer, which I think is a good inclusion because, as I mentioned, the meta is so fast, so this just helps you survive that extra turn you might need to get your big minions out. Now we have a slew of road decks coming in here. So I would kind of put these all in the same position, kind of a 3-way tie personally. But from my personal preference and my experience, I've had the most success with Mine Rogue. Mine Rogue is actually pretty great. The inclusion of Shadow of Demise gives you some extra value. So if you like playing Rogue, you should craft this card. It's great if you're into these kind of quirky, play a lot of card Rogue decks. But basically what you're doing here is you're getting out the Snowfall Graveyard, wrong card. You're getting the Blade out, and then you're activating the mines, whether it's by destroying your weapon, drawing it off the sketchy information. You can kill them with Backstab, you can kill them with your... Does this one run the 3 damage? There it is. The SI7 Extortion, and do a ton of damage out of nowhere to your opponent's face. Edwin Rogue. So with this specific list, instead of trying to deal a whole bunch of damage to your opponent's face, you're trying to get extremely massive minions on board. So you've got the double Edwin here. So you want to get this Edwin out as early as you can. Sometimes you can have some absolutely insane turn 1s or turn 2s because of the inclusions of Counterfeit Coin. So you can get a really big Edwin Van Cleef in the early game. You might be able to get a really big Edwin Defias Kingpin in the mid game. While you're doing all that fun, you might have a Sinstone Graveyard or two on the board. You quite often play 10, 11, 12 cards in a turn in this deck. So you get these massive stealth minions that your opponent might not necessarily be able to deal with. You got the Scribbling Stenografters, which are often very cheap because you're playing so many cards, so they're good for removal. But otherwise, really fun list. You can do some pretty ridiculous things. My personal best so far is a 22-22 Edwin, which my opponent instantly conceded to, which I enjoyed. And then we have Pillager Rogue. If you're not familiar with Pillager Rogue, you're essentially using a combo of your Spirit of the Shark, Scabs, Mailbox Dancers, and Tenwu of the Red Smoke to play as many cards as possible in a turn, and then finishing out your opponent by whacking him in the face with the Spectral Pillager. And of course the Scabs here reduces a lot of the cost for doing that, so you can do a lot of damage out of nowhere in the early to mid game. To round out tier 3 here, we have Jade Druid. Now I call it Jade Druid because it runs one Jade Idol, so technically that makes it a Jade deck. But basically what it does is it gains a whole lot of armor, clears your opponent's board, makes it difficult for them to progress in any way. You get a whole bunch of mana with Wild Heart Guff. You can play Twig and Sira Sapience to get to that 20 mana very quickly. And then a cute little combo here with the newly printed Anubrakan. So this is an 8 mana 7/7 Battlecry, gain 8 armor. This turn your minions cost armor instead of mana. So what you do is you play the newly printed Astalor Bloodsworn. This is a 2 mana 2/2. When you play it, you get I believe it's a 4 or 5 mana card that then heals you, not heals you, but gives you a bunch of armor. And then the final piece of this puzzle is a massive card that does 16 burst damage to your opponent. You can combo that with Bran. Again, keep in mind that you're paying armor to play all these cards, so you can do all this in a single turn and OTK your opponent. If the OTK doesn't work, you've got the Jade Idol as a backup plan to survive. And the last list I want to mention is Aggro Priest. Now, I've chosen a non-pirate version just to be different, and I've actually been queuing into non-pirate versions quite a bit. So if we look at this list, it's got some cards we don't typically see in Aggro Priest. You got the Crystal Smith Cultist, so this gets buffed if you're holding a Shadow spell, which is nice. So it's a 1 mana 2/3, which is pretty good. You've got the Crooked Cook. So you're dealing damage a lot of the time, so this just gives you a little bit of card draw, which is nice. You've got the Mind Eater, which is it's aggressively statted for a 2-drop, and you get a little bit of RNG by getting a card from your opponent's deck. And you've also got the Identity Theft, again, just to steal some of your opponent's cards for some extra push. But otherwise, it's Aggro Priest. You do a lot of damage out of nowhere, and you try and finish out your opponent with multiple Mind Blasts, which you might draw extras of from your Shadow Visions. So that rounds out my first wild meta view. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. You will also find in the description all of the deck codes to this wild meta view. And if you're a mobile user and it's difficult for you to copy those deck codes, you can visit my Discord. There's an easy to enter link in the description below. Go to the deck lists only channel and you'll find all the decks there. If you want to help support this channel, you can click the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and until next time, hope to see you again.